Hello, I'm Clare Moody, your Police and Crime Commissioner for Avon and Somerset. Every month we hold a live broadcast where I invite the Chief Constable to answer questions on the performance of Avon and Somerset Police and what is being done to address the public's key concerns about policing. This month, the questions are focused on the really important area of missing people. I decided to talk about missing people because I receive a lot of contact from the public about this. I also know that for all of us, the thought of a loved one going missing is something that we dread, and for those who experience this, the impact is devastating. It is something that happens all too often. In the last year in Avon and Somerset, there were over 4,700 missing people. That equates to 13 people every day. Today, I will be asking questions that the public have sent in about police processes and procedures. You will hear me reference the names of people who have sent in questions for today's meeting. But what we won't be discussing is individual cases. It is not my role as a politician to direct the course of any individual investigation, nor can I, or should I, direct resource that is involved in an investigation. My role is to hold the Chief Constable to account for the totality of policing, and I act as your voice, the voice of communities in our area in doing this. So now, let me welcome Sarah, Chief Constable of Avon and Somerset.
Hi Claire, hi everyone.
Thank you for joining me today. Before we look at the main questions that have been sent in, I'd like to start with some quick fire questions just to help set the context. So, Sarah, we've got a lot to get through with all the questions that have been sent in for this afternoon. So it would be great if you could keep your answers focused so we can cover as much ground as possible. Now to the quick fire questions. To start, can you tell us how many of those 4,700 people who go missing are found? And is this comparable to other policing areas?
So the first thing to say, most people who go missing are found. 50% are found within the first 12 hours, 70% within the first 24, and 85% within the first 48 hours. We'll come to this later, but at this moment, there are 48 outstanding missing person cases that date back to 1965. So most people come back. In terms of other policing areas, we don't actually collect that data between policing areas. We're very different population sizes, etc. But I've got no reason to believe we're an outlier at all.
Thank you, Sarah. Are there any trends or patterns about the people who go missing?
Okay, well, overall, we're seeing a reduction. So in the last 12 months, we've seen a 16% reduction. We link that to the Right Care, Right Person initiative, where we set really tighter protocols for when somebody is reported as missing, as opposed to a concern for welfare. Hospitals and children's home account for the most prominent locations where people go missing. For the last 12 months, if I look at it, 63% of people going missing were adults, 37% children. The peak age range actually is 12 to 18 years old. And actually elderly people, 65 and over, account for only about 4%. We do have a trend of repeat missing people. So if I look at the last 12 months, 30% of those reported missing have been reported missing before previously. And of children, that rises to 43%.
Okay, and approximately what proportion of policing time is focused on missing people?
Well, we did some detailed police activity analysis in 2023, and when we looked at all of our activity, 5% of all officer activity was focused on missing people investigations. If I take crime out of it, it's more like 90% of our non-crime activity. So quite significant.
Significant amount of time. Thank you for that additional detail in relation to how much of policing time is spent on this area. Now I'd like to talk about the process of investigating a missing person. This is the area where we've had the highest number of questions sent in. And firstly, how do you assess the vulnerability and risk associated with who is a missing person, with the missing person, and how does this follow national procedure?
Well, the national framework is given to us by the College of Policing. It's called Authorised Professional Practice, or APP for short, and in Avon and Somerset we adhere to that national guidance. So that's the national standard. Working to that guidance, cases are assessed for risk as low, medium, high, and that's based against the likelihood of the person being at harm or coming to harm, and the urgency that we conduct the investigation, the scale of it, is prioritised based on whether it's low, medium or high. So the first stage is always the call handler who takes that initial call, and they'll take key information that enables an initial risk assessment. But that risk assessment isn't static. There's high levels of supervision of these cases, always by an inspector with regular reviews. So as new information arises, we'll do a structured review to see whether, well, was medium right? Does it need to be escalated or de-escalated, if you like? The national guidance is also key, that there is a role for partners in the investigation of missing people and the assessment of risk. So we do work with the local authority, with health, with social care. On a daily basis, our Lighthouse Safeguarding Units share information on the people reported missing. So we've got the maximum information to make our risk assessment.
Thank you for that. Stephen, Angela and others are concerned about investigators making assumptions about the missing people or why they are missing, and this having a negative impact on the investigation. So there are assumptions made at the off around the individual concerned. How do you ensure that investigators remain open-minded and that they maintain professional curiosity? Okay,
well, the first thing I'd say, objectivity, open-mindedness, professional curiosity are vital skills, essential skills for police officers, full stop. And we have this kind of maxim in policing called the ABC. So assume nothing, believe no one, check everything. That's embedded throughout policing, through training, through guidance, through culture, through supervision. When it comes to missing person investigations, we're helped by that APP, the authorised professional practice that I talked about. So when, for instance, the first officers at the scene gather information, they're doing so through a structured process, an investigation guide for missing persons that's based on national best practice. So that guides them through the process, which enables them to capture the information that enables us to do that first review of the risk assessment. What then happens is that regular review by supervisory officers come in. So we have the structured capture, we have the open-mindedness, but then we have lots of scrutiny and oversight. So if it's low risk or medium risk, the inspector oversight will come from a uniform response inspector, and it will pass between them. So there's always check and test between different people looking at it at different times. Where we assess something as high risk is actually a DI or a DCI will be guiding and directing that investigation.
And a DI and DCI just
is detective inspector or detective chief inspector. So they have the investigative training and specialism to be able to be thinking very, very carefully, especially about being open-minded and professionally curious, and all the tactics available to them. If a case is particularly complex or it's prolonged, so those small number of cases, then we will ask a senior detective, so a detective superintendent, chief superintendent, to conduct a review to add extra scrutiny, a fresh pair of eyes to make sure that we've been exhaustive in our inquiries. For some cases, we'll even have a strategic coordinating, or commonly called a gold group, chaired by a chief officer to make sure that we're overseeing not just the investigative response, but the support to families, to communications, so that we can get maximum public engagement into the search for the person. And on occasions, we'll even invite a peer review. We'll ask another police force or a national agency with expertise, so expertise on search and psychology, for instance, profiling, National Crime Agency. On occasions, we've asked for help as well. Again, a fresh pair of eyes.
And when you talk about a chief officer, you're talking about assistant chief constable or
Deputy Chief Constable.
Right, yeah. And I was going to ask you to just explore a little further, which you just did at the end of that comment, around the checking and testing, monitoring and auditing of that being in place, that those are, you are certain that professional curiosity is being followed through.
Absolutely, and these happen at set times, different times for different risks, and there will be individual eventualities where somebody might not be able to review at 12 hours but need to do it at 13 hours. But this has regular review, and it's often handed over to someone else to give a second pair of eyes into that review process. That's because information is being gathered all the time, but this is a highly reviewed, highly scrutinised area of business, and I'm sure we'll talk about this process a little bit later.
Thank you, Sarah. So, moving on, there's another set of questions that have come in around a perception, and we've seen this on, talked about online, that a lot of young men have gone missing from Avon and Somerset recently. And Natalie asked, are you making connections between all the young men that have gone missing in the area over the last year?
I mean, we're satisfied on the information that we have at the moment that there's no information or intelligence or evidence to suggest a link between these cases. But as we've just said, we keep an open mind and an objective mindset and that review process. So if any information came forward that suggested there was a link, we'd absolutely make it. But at the moment, we're satisfied that we can't make a link between those cases.
Okay. And Angela suggested that there should be a standard protocol which is followed in every missing person case. Does this exist already? And again, does this follow national practice?
Well, I agree with Angela. As we've talked about, the College of Policing give us an evidence-based framework through that APP, and we follow that guidance. But it's also right to say that's exhaustive for every eventuality of a missing person investigation, and each investigation is different. Now, there are some standard things we would do in every missing person investigation. If I give an example, we would always search the home very thoroughly of a person who's gone missing, irrespective of the circumstances. But there will also be the individual circumstances of that case that mean we might prioritise something. That will always come very early, but prioritise something. So an elderly person who was seen 10 minutes ago walking away from a care home towards a woodland, that would be prioritised for early searches of that area as well. So that's an example of, we also have to be cognizant of the individual circumstances and make sure we're prioritising in those places where we're most likely to find that person quickly.
Thank you, Sarah. As you is clear from the number of questions that we've had on this area that there is a lot of interest in the investigative processes around missing people, and people who there is more to be done to raise the levels of trust that people have in the police response in this area. I now want to move on to a separate area, which is around CCTV. And this is clearly very important in the investigation of a missing person. We've had a number of comments and questions on this. So Is CCTV with broad time parameters collected at the outset?
Well, CCTV is it's one of those standard considerations in every missing person inquiry because it's so prevalent. So it will be a consideration at the outset of an investigation. Parameters will be set, but in the early moments of an investigation, from the information we'll have, those parameters will be broad. We'll be wanting to secure and preserve everything that we can. Sometimes in a missing person inquiry, we can gather not just weeks, but thousands of hours worth of CCTV. There will be parameters set for reviewing. And as we review an investigation and gather more information, so 12 hours on, our knowledge may have moved on so much that we need to set more parameters for gathering more CCTV. So it's a common thing that's thought of at the beginning. We secure and preserve, we continually review, and we set clear parameters for reviewing. We do have limited resources and we manage lots of things in policing. So sometimes the decision is not the right one to trawl over thousands and thousands of hours when actually we want to balance our resources following other inquiries as well as the best chance that we can have to find that individual.
And the last question in this section is from Sarah, who emailed in and suggested that the investigation be stepped up when a person has been missing for a week. What's your view on this, and how do you assess, Sarah suggested a week, but how do you suggest over a time period? How do you assess the changing risk over a certain time period?
In the way that I've said, really. So 85% of people are found within 48 hours. So most people will be found before a week goes by. But as I've said, cases are reviewed regularly, and I mean in at least every day. So we regularly, on the information that we have, if that information suggests it needs to be escalated, it will be, irrespective whether it's day 2, day 3, day 7, or indeed I can think of one case where someone was missing for 10 years, new information came in that meant that was escalated, reopened as an active investigation, and led to a prosecution eventually. So a week, setting a particular time frame may not be the right thing. We are led by the risk based on the information in the review that we have.
Are there you talked about the APP, the national guidance on this. Are there any time frames linked into that process?
Yeah, and we'll come to some of them, but it depends on low, medium and high. There will be different time frames that are different, but a missing person inquiry will have reviews within the first 6 hours, and then 12 hours, then daily, and it will continue, and there will be other reviews for even long-term missing people where there are expected time frames when this would happen.
Thank you. So that takes us to that point around the longer-term missing people. And is there a policing definition of long-term missing?
Well, it's not specific in the College of Policing guidance, but I think it's inferred, and that would say that long-term refers to cases that have been open 28 days or more. What the APP says is that a senior officer, and this is for us, this would be Detective Superintendent, Chief Superintendent, should review long-term cases, i.e. those, this is where the inference comes, over 28 days or longer, completed at the latest after 28 days, but also, if the person's still outstanding, 3 months, 6 months, and then at 12-month intervals thereafter. And
based on the definition of over 28 days, or how many people are long-term missing from Avon and Somerset?
On our records, we have 48 long-term missing people. We don't have the responsibility for all of those, but we hold those records because immigration have the responsibility for some of them, because there's strong information to suggest that these are people who are overstaying in the UK. 27 of those 48 cases date from before the year 2000. The oldest one we have is from 1965. We have 8 cases post-2020, of which at least 4 of them we're satisfied are in that category of immigration cases where we think the individual is in the country but is overstaying and not seeking to be found.
Thank you. And Judy asked a question about the investigations being, in her words, wound down. When do the investigations stop and what happens?
Okay. So when we've completed all the sensible, credible, reasonable, available lines of inquiry, and we do get to that point. We followed up everything, and we found we've got nothing else to go on. A senior detective, and I come back to that, detective superintendent, chief superintendent, they are satisfied that we have done those inquiries to the fullest extent, we've documented them properly. Then that case will be sent to our major crime and statutory review team. Now what that team does is they own, and they're the holders of those 48 cases, if you like, and they will ensure that those cases are reviewed annually, or in the event of a new piece of information or evidence comes to light. And they will also take responsibility for making sure families are communicated with and stay in contact and have a point of contact. So you may see and have seen appeals for people that have been long-term missing people. That will be our major crime team doing a review, either in light of new information or because it's part of their annual review, trying to prompt new information. So whilst we may get to the end of what is immediately an active inquiry, we never give up on these cases. We do go back to them, we do review them, and as I've given in that case that I talked about, that somebody was missing for over 10 years, new information came to light, a new investigation was started, and it did result in a prosecution of someone for murder last year.
So that team will take a case. Will they do a review when they take the case, or do they?
They will look at that case, but remember, before it gets to them, the trigger is a senior detective doing a review and being satisfied that at that point they will do a process of ensuring that everything's documented, that there is a current situation report, because it may be somebody new who picks it up in 12 months' time. So we don't just leave anything hanging. We have a clear understanding of this is where we are right now, this is what's been done, this is where we are, so that if something new comes in, we can immediately pick it up and go back to a full understanding of where we are. Some of these cases will have generated huge amounts of information. Just to read it will be quite a task. So the major crime review team will make sure that it's in a very strong position, that should something happen, we can respond quickly.
Thank you. I want to talk now about how you support the families of missing people. Support obviously starts with good communication and providing the families with relevant information. So do you explain the process of investigation from the outset so families know what to expect?
Yeah, so what we would do, and this is very much following the authorised professional practice, we make immediate contact with the family, and let's remember 85% of cases there will be a conclusion within 48 hours. So we make immediate contact with the family. The aim of that is twofold. One, to gather critical information that helps us make that risk assessment, helps us make the right decisions about what are the first actions to take. But it also is an opportunity for us to give reassurance and to explain the process, to an extent that's right at that time, because people obviously will be very worried, concerned. They might not be in the position to take in all the information we've just gone through about how we do a missing person inquiry. So what we want to do there is to build an understanding that's transparent, it builds trust, and we kind of set a foundation for structured and consistent communication that follows in a way that meets the needs of the family. So that initial contact's really important.
And how you've touched on this a little bit, but how do you recognise that each family will have their own needs and they'll have their own ways of responding, in that immediate point, but also, if there is a longer period of time?
I mean, there's training for this, but police officers have to develop. Often people ask me what's the most important skill a police officer can have, and courage is one, but empathy and compassion is another. The ability to actively listen and be able to respond to the situation that individual is in. So we will use our professional knowledge gained over time, but we will also talk to the family about their needs and what's required. And we can also involve other agencies, so the charity Missing People. They often help in long-term missing cases, but they also are there to be able to help in short-term and the medium-term as well.
So, throughout the investigation, are you keeping the families updated about what you have found? And are there reasons why you would have to withhold information?
Yes, we are keeping people updated throughout. We'll be talking about new information that we've gathered. We'll be talking about actions we've taken. We'll often be talking about actions we intend to take. If it's a high-risk missing person inquiry, the contact would be regular and quite intense. And I'm sure we'll go on to talk about family liaison officers as a dedicated point of contact, so that's almost a constant presence. In terms of delaying or withholding information, I mean, the default is no, but there are some circumstances in line, and this is part of the authorised professional practice, where we could, with a justifiable reason, and this would need to be overseen by that reviewing officer of rank, delaying or withholding information. So if I could give some circumstances. So where there's operational security, and by that I mean where that information could reach the ears of a suspect, where it could jeopardise surveillance, for instance. A second area would be where there are safeguarding concerns. So where we think there might be domestic abuse or honour-based violence or exploitation, where it's justified, we may withhold or delay information then, and people can understand why that would be. There may be legal or privacy concerns as well. So where an adult goes missing and they have full capacity, they may have made it clear that they do not want family members or other people told of their whereabouts, or certain information that they've made clear they don't want people to be known, and we have to follow that. And also there may be occasions when we've got very scant, unverified or incomplete information where we need to do more work on it before we share it, because it could create more confusion, or it could create more anxiety than it needs to, especially when we can't vouch for it.
But your default position is one of transparency and honesty and openness.
Oh gosh, yes, and that's the AP. The APP says that. Our own procedural guidance, which mirrors it, says that. Transparency as default. Withholding information very much is exceptional, and it has to be justified.
And throughout all of this, how closely do you follow that national guidance? We've talked about it a number of times so far.
I mean, it's underpinned in everything we do. So from that first investigation guide booklet, it's been structured to meet the requirements of the national guidance. If we're ever reviewed, and clearly every time a review takes place, whether it's an internal review, scrutiny by a senior officer, a peer review, it's against that framework. If something goes wrong and a complaint is made, and we refer ourselves to the Independent Officers of Police Conduct or our Professional Standards Unit, it's against that standard that we're being reviewed. So it is the framework around which we operate.
Thank you, Sarah. Judy was interested in the use of family liaison officers. You mentioned them earlier, otherwise known as flows. When are flows deployed, and how long do they support families for?
Okay, so the family liaison role, actually, it derives, and technically its only use is in homicide investigations, but we have found through learning that it's an incredibly valuable function in missing person inquiries as well, particularly high risk or prolonged ones. Now those FLOs act as a dedicated point of contact, as we've said. They are there to be able to explain our investigation procedures, the timeline, some of the things we've discussed today, and they are also there, as I say, with that compassion, emotional support and other services. In terms of length of time, well, that varies on a case-by-case basis, and I've talked about the charity Missing People. They will often refer a family with their consent to Missing People to offer additional support as well, and that can be in a short term, when lots of things are happening, or it can be, when things maybe are becoming more prolonged and there's a need for support then. So it will vary on a case-by-case basis. It may become more intense and less intense depending on where that investigation is at that particular time.
Which also then flows into a further part of the questioning on this, which is how do you ensure that families are provided with continuation of care when a case is moved into that longer term?
Yeah, and that's where the major crime review, and I know it's a very mouthful, major crime and statutory review team. It's a small team of expertise. They are the guardians of both our cold cases and our unresolved missing people cases. Yeah. The small number of officers in there take responsibility for individual cases, and they become the point of contact for the families when they reach that stage.
And finally, on this area, you have talked about this a little bit already, but are there specialist support services available that you signpost to?
Yes, the Missing People charity,
yeah.
Which are largely made up by families that have gone through these circumstances and have really good understanding and knowledge and empathy, and are a really great support, and can offer a lived experience that even we can't.
That lived experience is so important, and we've had a number of questions in around the family liaison work, so having that outside contact as well, I think, is really valuable for people. So moving to the penultimate question, what are you doing to prevent people from going missing? And I'm particularly here thinking about people who go missing repeatedly and how you work with other organisations to break the cycle of that repeated pattern of going missing.
Well, the first kind of place we look for prevention, as you say, is the missing people, the repeat cases. So the first stage is a return for home interview. So we try to get behind the reasons of why the person went missing, what are the root causes, what are the drivers. We will also look at, with partners, at problem-solving interventions that address those drivers. We'll also look at, where it's appropriate, safeguarding plans tailored to that individual's needs. So we keep them at risk of harm. So I'm thinking child sexual exploitation, criminal exploitation in that context. Yeah. A second area is the broader safeguarding. So even before someone's gone missing, so they haven't been a repeat yet, but they're early warning signs. We'll work through our safeguarding responsibility. The 12 to 18-year-olds is our biggest.
What are the early warning signs that you were talking about?
Links to child sexual exploitation, links to child criminal exploitation, maybe mental health. So that may be being referred to us by another agency. So already we will be saying that this is a child or a young person, or in some cases an adult, at risk. So whether it's at risk of maybe going missing, but maybe criminal activity, we'll be trying to intervene. We do that anyway. And then there's the work of our neighbourhood teams, because they do build trust with individuals and families in communities. They're able to act on intelligence. They'll also be able to see and can maybe come across some of those young people in particular in scenarios where they look like they're at risk. That can trigger that safeguarding conversation. That can trigger that problem solving, that safeguarding plan.
So the final question today is about improving the service that you offer. Sarah asked, what lessons have been identified from missing person cases over the last few years?
So there's always learning. Learning is one of our values in Avon in Somerset. I mean, I pick three things really. One would be the targeted early intervention and prevention that I've talked about, particularly where there are repeat missing cases, but where there are early signs. I think a second area is actually one we haven't touched upon is disproportionality.
Yes.
We know that black children go missing for longer periods of time. We know that, and this is just nationally as well as locally, and that the risk factors for black children may not be properly being identified, and therefore our response, which is very much based on risk, it's not as timely as it could be. So that, I guess, goes to another reason why we acknowledged institutional race, and another reason for our work on race matters that we've talked about before, Clare. And I guess the third area of learning is the impact on trust and confidence. We know that we've had some high profile cases. We know that if there is a perception that our response has been insufficient or inconsistent or biased in some way, that can have an impact. So learning from that is we need to be trauma informed. That's part of our strategy. We need to have better communication with the family. That's why we use family liaison officers in the way we do. And that we need to have strong leadership and accountability. So those are the kind of cases that we now have strategic coordinating groups, or gold groups as they're commonly known, with lots and lots of players from around the constabulary, making sure that there is senior chief officer accountability, driving and ensuring there's scrutiny around those investigations.
Thank you, Sarah. It is really important to know that there is consistent reflection and change that is being driven around this area of work as well as other areas of work, so that there is that kind of meaningful change in experience for people as well. So that was our last question on this topic. I know that today we have gone over time. Usually we try to stick to 30 minutes for these police question times, but we've had so much public engagement on this issue that it was worth spending the additional time on this. So thank you to you for your patience in continuing to watch to now. And thank you as well for the many people that got in touch in advance of this broadcast. And for your engagement in this process. I hope those of you that are watching have felt that your questions were answered in this PQT. We record all the questions that come in for future sessions, and we will soon be inviting you to send in questions for the next PQT. Your contributions, as I hope you've seen today, are what make these sessions so valuable. So thank you for taking part. Please join us for the next PQT. Details will be shared on my website and social media in the coming weeks. And feedback is also really welcome, which you can give via my website. So thank you, Sarah, for being here this afternoon, and thank you all for listening and watching.